Good morning, everybody. It's 10 o'clock. We're going to go ahead and get started. I know folks will continue to join us here. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being on time. As I mentioned to a few folks who joined on earlier, I invite you to please share your video if you are so willing. It makes a big difference for creating a stronger connection for folks, especially as we're in this shelter in place and we have to meet virtually. Part of the opportunity here is to build relationships, and seeing each other's faces certainly helps with that. So I invite you to do that. If you have not already discovered the chat box, that is very active in these meetings. If you don't know where the chat box is, if you move your cursor, you'll actually see a little notice down there that says chat. I invite you to open that up. And so that we're have an idea of everybody who's here, I invite you to please write in the chat box your name, the neighborhood, community, or organization with which you're associated, and your email address. If you've already done this for all the myriad of other meetings we've already done, I invite you to do that again if you don't mind. That would be really, really helpful. And as I will note later on here, we actually provide a contact list because though we're coming together on a regular basis, the real work happens between these meetings, and it's important for people to be able to get in touch with each other. If for some reason you do not want your name on that contact sheet, I invite you to please let Joe Trotty know on our team. If you, in that chat box, it defaults to everybody. There's a little downward arrow, and if you push that downward arrow, you'll be able to find Joe's name there, Joe Trotty on our team, and you can opt out of being included in that contact sheet. So moving on, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Stephanie Charrington. I am with the backbone organization of Eastside Pathways. Eastside Pathways is a partnership, first and foremost, a partnership of public, private, and nonprofit entities and community members in East King County. And in order for that partnership to function, the backbone serves as the convener and facilitator. We also work to weave together data and communication on behalf of the partnership. And as we, as a world, have entered into this COVID crisis, the backbone has had the opportunity to really shift our work of convening and facilitating to doing this on behalf of the broader community. This is not just for Eastside Pathways partners. This is for everybody who really wants to have the opportunity to connect. Many, many children, families, adults, members in our community, businesses, nonprofit organizations, we're all challenged at this time. And so this is an opportunity where we can come together and start to share and ultimately start to create some results and better supports and services for those in need. So that's a little bit about Eastside Pathways. I'm going to move to the next slide, Joe, if you don't mind, just talking about meeting logistics. I think many of you have been on these calls before, but for anybody who's new, again, I invite you to share your video. That is an opportunity for us to connect. And just a note, when you enter in, everybody's on mute. I invite you, you'll be invited throughout this meeting to unmute yourself and share verbally. That's really important. When you take the opportunity to do that, I invite you to please say your name. It's really helpful for folks who are who may not be able to see your video in the screen at that moment, and for anybody who might be on the phone. So as you unmute yourself, just say, you know, this is Stephanie. I'd like to share blah, blah, blah. Very, very important in this work is to make sure you have a notepad and pens. There will be a summary. We record these meetings. We record breakout sessions that will happen towards the latter part of this meeting. And there'll be a summary of the chat that gets very, very robust in these meetings. But it's also really important for you to be taking notes of who you might want to connect with between these meetings, or other particular points of interest for you. Again, I mentioned the chat. It's a great place to ask questions to the group. It's a great place to provide information. We, of course, want you to take care of your needs. And as I already mentioned, that this will be recorded. I did mention this briefly before the meeting started. Another just quick logistic that's helpful for folks. If you move your cursor either by your video or where your name is, there's a little ellipses. And if your name is not displaying, if it's just your organization, for example, it's often really, really helpful for others to see your name. You can change that by clicking that ellipses and you can put in your name there. If for some reason we see that you haven't had a chance to do that, we do have some of our team that is in the background doing that for people that they know. And this gives me the opportunity to introduce our team really quickly. So first we have Kalika Curry, who is one of our community impact managers. Kalika, if you can wave. Then we have Sandy Nathan, who is also one of our community impact managers who are facilitators for our work. Also on this call is Peyton Richardson, who is our data officer. And Joe Trotty, who is our communications manager. Joe, if you want to give a wave, if you can, maybe you can't because you're doing the slides. And then behind the scenes, our business and operations manager is Vicki Hughes. So Vicki, give a wave to everybody. It's great. So that's the team working this production behind the scenes and in front and helping lead. As we think about the purpose of this meeting series, I talked about the opportunity, in these first few weeks to really lift up things that were urgent that had to be addressed, for connections to be made. And now we're in this phase of, okay, these connections are being made, and how are we really working together towards more equitable results? And I think about Eastside Pathways, our partnership has had a strategic plan where it really is important to bring together these different stakeholders of public, private, nonprofit, individuals in the community, neighborhoods, etc. And what I've seen in these convenings is that that's happening. It is truly happening. One of the things we have to recognize is that we, all of us on this call and our communities, have developed systems that unfortunately create barriers for kids and families and adults to get supports and services and access to supports and services. So with us coming together in this way with multiple stakeholders, we have the opportunity to strengthen relationships with each other, which is really, really important, because when this work gets hard, we will have to lean in on those relationships. It's our opportunity for this real-time sharing and, of course, reducing duplication or gaps in services. And now this is really our opportunity for us to make sure that we're engaging with community so that they are actually helping co-design solutions together. So we're all designing these solutions so that they really are equitable results. So that is really our purpose here today. So thank you for continuing to be here as we start to dig in even further to getting to those equitable results. For those, let's switch slides, Joe, thank you. For those who have been in Eastside Pathways convenings, you know that Gracious Space is an opportunity for us and how we start to share and open up our meetings. And this is our chance to really invite everybody into the space, including those who may not be here, having their voices represented. And it also gives us a chance to start to frame our minds into the work that we're about to do. So this is your Gracious Space question for this morning. Think of a quality or characteristic you've used or seen used that you believe has effectively engaged community in developing solutions. So take a moment, it's up there on the screen. Think about that. And again, this is the opportunity for everybody to start to share. So you can put that in the chat box. You can just start to think about what those qualities or characteristics are in the chat that you've seen or used yourself that you believe has effectively engaged community in developing solutions. And I'm going to invite folks to put, I see some coming in chat. That's fantastic. Thank you. Humility, curiosity. I also want to invite folks to unmute and also share.
Stephanie, this is Sue Baugh. And I think what I've seen is a willingness to think outside the box and work collaboratively without concern about protecting your own organization's turf, so to speak, to get more effective results for the community. And I think that's really obvious in this group.
That's great, Sue. Really a great reminder. And probably one of the more difficult things for people to do is to not be so protective of turf. We really have to, if we're ultimately going to get solutions that work for everybody, there are going to be some things that have to be given up. So it's a great addition. Thank you. Great honesty, vulnerability, inquisitiveness, transparency, really good responses in the chat box. I'm going to open it up to allow for one or two more people to offer vocally if they'd like to.
This is Kathy Habib. I'm on the Eastside Pathways board. You know, I think it's great when community members, so people who really are coming here as a member of the community, when we create space for their voice to be heard, and we really recognize their voice as something really important to listen to. And those of you who are operating a program in the community, and when you're hearing those voices from community of what their needs are, taking the opportunity to lift that up for others to hear, and for the rest of us to listen, like Sue said, without really assigning blame.
That's great, Kathy. Thank you.
This is Lynn. I would just say that what I wrote is the ability to present data that supports what your ask is or what the point is you're trying to make. And I would like to, later on in this call, kind of go where the need to, is there a need to collect data? Do we need to do that in an organized way? And does everybody have the capacity, or do they need help with that?
That's great, Lynn. Thank you. It's a great addition. And I think you'll see we've tried to design this this meeting to allow for space for that as well. So thank you for bringing that up. One more. There's a lot of great addition in the chat box as well. I want to lift up here. I see Jennifer Fisher. Jennifer, thanks for putting that in there, reaffirming for what Sue added. And I think it's really important for us to celebrate successes and where people are stepping into this work. Jennifer offered Rainier Athletes fundraising for Bellevue LifeSpring. So really getting rid of that kind of turf, that kind of protection of turf, and really stepping out to help each other to understand how we can ultimately get to those equitable results. So thanks, Jennifer, for adding that.
Can I add something else, Stephanie, real quick? I don't know if you all saw that HopeLink is opening up their food banks for a food drive, I believe on April 18th. So we're going to be putting that out to our donors in our weekly update, just to support what they're doing in their efforts.
That's great. Thank you, Jennifer. Do we have somebody from HopeLink on the line? Quick question. For the food drive that's happening, I want to, when we do the larger group, just to make sure that there's clarification on if they're accepting food still, because I know that there were some changes there. So when we do the larger group discussion, hopefully we'll have somebody from HopeLink to be able to offer some additional information on that.
Yeah, I'm here and happy to share. Thanks everyone for your support.
Fantastic. Okay, terrific. Now we're gonna keep moving along here, and I'm gonna turn it over to Peyton to start us through some of the data discussions that we normally do. So Peyton, take it away.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you all again for coming out and sharing your screens and your homes with us, if you will. It's really, again, great to see everyone continuing to come out for these calls. And a little bit what we're going to talk about today in terms of data is, again, looking at two general streams, kind of what these calls are doing, how you all are mobilizing, but also what you all are doing kind of outside of these calls and what other actions can we move towards. So again, these are just some infographics about the summary of kind of what's been going on, who's been on these calls, the unique individuals and organizations, and how we've all been working together. And I think it really shows, as it continues to grow, that this is a very, very basic metric, but it makes me know that we have work to do, but we are really making progress as we get folks together and continue to try and push towards solutions. On the next slide, we have this was, again, I want to thank everyone who took the exit poll last Tuesday, 2 days ago. This is data from that. And what I wanted to highlight again, as we move this work, we see that this left box, this green box called phase 1, these are some answers that you all gave. And those are really, I'm happy to see that, we feel that these differences have been made. Community needs assessed. Gaps in services recognized, the community voice. And I like that because those are things that we wanted to do to set a foundation for the work that we are continuing to do. And as we move to phase 2, those numbers are lower, and I think that's perfectly fine. We are still continuing to do this work, but we want to move from assessing community needs to meeting them, from recognizing the gaps in service to actually filling them. And continuing to create more resources. So again, these are data that you all have provided, and it's just really good for the backbone here at EP to know that we hopefully have set a really strong foundation for the work that we're looking to do towards moving to solutions. So I think that it is good that we have really checked some boxes in phase 1, and we're moving towards working a little bit more intentionally here in phase 2. I am going to now look at these. These data are, again, when we asked on Tuesday, what were some of the gaps that were existing? We gave a few examples, and we wanted you all to let us know either verbally or through the chat. And what I want to do is make sure that I captured these gaps. So I'm going to give everyone a couple, maybe 1 or 2 minutes to read, and please, in the chat or verbally, just let us know if there's anything that is missing. We're not going to spend too much time here because we have some other data, but again, as we look at communities, individuals, populations falling into the gap, just let us know if there are things that are not captured here that you feel are extremely critical. We try to be, in the call as inclusive as we could, but I want to make sure that we have given a very, very good portrait of what who might be missing. Thank you. I'm seeing mental health needs that are difficult to meet in a stay-at-home environment, which I think is really something that we want to lift up. And yes, the age gap is something that is not captured here. Folks who have aged out of the system, but are not necessarily, full adults yet. Excellent. All right. So thank you for lifting that up. So before we move to the next slide, I just want to make sure that we understand, like, this is what you all have said were the gaps. These are populations that we feel are not touched, not supported by all that we have, or maybe here and there, but not systemically. So moving on to the next slide. This, I just wanted to give, these are just some numbers. Who is here? Who do we have? And these, I want everyone to just take a look at these. Again, are rough East King County estimates from the census, the ACE, the American Community Survey. And on the right column, we have the population in Bellevue and Lake Washington school districts. And now these numbers are not complete. There are students and folks who might be in the catchment area that might not be here. But I wanted to give us some numbers as to what the populations look like. Because as we talk about missing populations and folks who might not be served, they are part of these numbers. They are part of this community, and they will continue to fall through these gaps until there are systemic changes made. So I wanted to set this context of this is who is here. This is our community. So I'll let you look at that for a second.
Peyton, I might have missed this. This is Judy. These numbers are how current?
Judy, that's a great question. And I will answer the homeless data for East King County. I did not pull, mostly because that was, again, it was a transient number, and the numbers are 5-year estimates, so I was not able to pull data. So if anyone does have data on homeless, the homeless population in East King County in general, that would be helpful. To answer your question, Judy, these are numbers pulled from OSPI this morning. So these are the current numbers from the reports for these 2 school districts.
Thank you.
Hayden, we can get you Bellevue-related numbers from the city. This is Helena Stevens from the city. So work with me offline and I can get you additional data information.
Excellent. Thank you very, very, very much.
Hey, Peyton,
So-
Peyton, this is Sue Baugh. I just
Yes.
want to confirm. So this is saying that there are more than 36,000 English language learners in the Bellevue and Lake Washington School District? Is that what this is saying?
Sure.
That's a huge number.
That is a large number.
I
Let me
mean,
make sure that that is correct.
it almost looks like the decimal's in the wrong place. I mean, I could believe maybe, well, I don't have any,
Right,
have
I will-
any frame of reference, but that sounds huge. And especially because it says in East King County, the East King County numbers smaller than the Bellevue and Lake Washington school districts.
Yes, that is true. That is likely a mistake on my part. I apologize. I will get accurate numbers out for that graph.
I was going to say, if that's it, if that's true, that's news right there. So
Thank you for pointing that out. I think that is a miscopy of the numbers. So thank you for pointing that out.
sure.
Continuous improvement, I do appreciate it. And
No
still,
problem.
Strike that,
We're all
but-
paying attention. That's the key element.
right. So I'm going to move ahead, and I will make sure and take an action item to update that slide.
Okay.
This comes from the Washington State Department of Health. And again, I want to give us pause here. Most folks know that, King County here is has been hit hard with COVID-19. And the reason that I bring this up is as we look at who is here and the gaps that we see and why those gaps are now, they're not larger now, but we're having a little bit more of a focus on what those gaps are. It is obviously due to this kind of public health crisis. And with such a large amount of cases here in King County. Just get your mental model around, okay, if these numbers are here and if we know that these gaps exist because of this public health challenge and it's so prevalent here, just begin to think about how folks are falling into those gaps and how much of a struggle that is and how much of an acute struggle it is because it came on so quickly. And before we move to the next slide is national trends. And so I want to bring up what Lynn said, that racialized data is very difficult to come by on a local level around this public health crisis. It is very dynamic and it is new, but I did want to lift up a few national trends that do speak to our population. We have over in the upper left-hand corner, looking at how, pay cuts or lost jobs due to this crisis have, differentially impacted certain segments. On the right side, circled in those red circles, we have an understanding that, the percentage of adults who are in some sort of distress. And, we see that certain populations are going through more distress than others. And here in the bottom, we see something that is becoming more prevalent. And this is, again, these are national numbers, not local numbers, but, incidents of racism, racial epithets are, just assaults on Asian American or Pacific Islanders. And this graph just looks at the ethnicity of the respondents who were taking the brunt of those racial epithets. The reason that I'm bringing this up again is to really allow us to look at, what the gaps were, who were serving in this community, and what, on a national level, and we could speculate as to what happens here in Washington, in King County, what these populations may be dealing with that might be, different, or where they might be falling into gaps. So, and I want to see if anyone wanted to summarize, or was there anything that these data brought up for you?
Hey, Peyton, this is Kalika. I think having the pleasure of getting to work with you, I get to look at data quite often, and I'm seeing a lot of these numbers mirror what we see prior to this in our communities. So I guess disappointing, but not surprising. Just similar arcs and similar populations. I also really appreciate you bringing up the impact that this is having specifically on our Asian American community, as we know that there's been a reported increase in hate crimes or racially charged things going on in our community. So I really appreciated being able to see what that is so I can create some empathy, or just really centering those folks during this time.
Thank you, Kalika. So I'm going to move on to a little bit of a journal prompt. We were a little tight on time, but this really does speak to what Lynn said earlier about looking at what data do we have. As I mentioned, it's very difficult to gather racialized data, especially around this challenge, as the numbers are changing, and we want to make sure that we're increasing equity in our access, so there might not be as much data collected. But the question here is, it's still critical to capture data, especially this disaggregated or racialized data. And the question to you all is, via the chat or verbally, I invite you to unmute yourself. How are you capturing and validating the data around the services that you're doing or the populations that you're serving? So we have an idea of, how are we serving these gaps? How are we filling them in? And how are we making sure that folks don't fall through them? So I'm going to give everyone a few minutes, and please unmute yourself or write in the chat box a response to that prompt.
We had a police forum yesterday at Bellevue City Hall, and our chief of police, Chief Milet, told the story that was pretty compelling about how since the COVID virus.
Yeah, I wanted
Or
some
do you want
eggs.
to wait until after
No,
this?
I'll eat. I'll just,
You're not planning on talking or?
I don't think
I
so.
think someone's unmuted.
Oh, okay, I'll just continue. He
Okay.
said that since the COVID virus, that they had seen, this significant increase in gun sales, but the purchasers all had Asian names and most were Chinese origin names. And so it made him feel that there's a whole lot more going on with this hate crimes or microaggression than is being reported. And so they did this forum yesterday and they had 200 people call in to talk about what their experiences are. So we've only had 2 complaints to the city up until that moment, actual complaints from people of Asian descent. And so that was unbelievable to see how much is going on that is not being reported and is compelling enough for people to want to go out and buy guns to protect themselves.
Hey, Peyton, this is Kalika. I just thank you for that, Lynn. I know we do have quite a few people from the Asian Pacific Islander community on this call. I just want to create space if any of them would like to join in at this time.
Lynn, this is Samantha Pack from the Eastside Reporter newspapers, and I was wondering, is that, because I know there was the virtual town hall with Chief Milet that they were going to have last week and it was rescheduled. Is that available to view like after the fact somewhere?
I was looking for it myself and I couldn't find it, but I'm sure if you send somebody an email at the city, they'll track it down for you. Do you know who to contact?
I'll email Megan.
Yeah, she would be the one.
I know that they had rescheduled. I just hadn't realized it was yesterday. I guess I missed it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I guess this, like, speaking on the racism against Asians, I literally just today, like, I wrote a piece that about what's been happening on the east side, and similar to what Lynn said, I haven't seen, when I talked to law enforcement, the people that got back to me, they either only saw like 1 or 2 incidents, like in Redmond and Bellevue. At that time, each city only had 1 incident reported, but most of the law enforcement are saying that doesn't mean that things aren't happening, people just aren't reporting it. And, I talked to them a little bit about what kind of outreach they're doing and everything. And Bellevue had the most, they had the town hall yesterday, and I think Redmond police, like they're doing a little bit as well, but it's, from what I was able to gather from when I talked to people, Bellevue had the most, it seemed like they were doing the most because I think they saw the most data in terms of like what Lynn was saying in terms of like the gun sales and everything, because other cities haven't seen as much.
We may have a larger population on the east side too. I don't know.
Thank you. Okay. All right, so I do appreciate all of this conversation and all of the, thank you, all of the questions about the data, and thank you, Sue, for bringing that up. I'm getting some live numbers as we speak, and I will drop those in the chat. But before, because we're a little behind, I want to hand it off to Kalika, who's going to lead us forward with our kind of adaptive area of the call today.
Thanks, Peyton. Love the conversation we're having. Good news is we're going to continue to pull that thread through the rest of this call. I think just doubling down on what I heard Stephanie say is around the team is working really hard to design these meetings for you all to really continue to drive this work deeper, to really help identify where those gaps are. One of the things we really want to emphasize on this call today is to focus on community engagement. Before I go any further, one thing that was lifted up for us in Sandy Nathan, my co-facilitator's work, was taking pause to invite anybody who has the capacity to speak in a different language. If you would like to translate the question here, I definitely want to create space for that, either unmuting yourself or using that chat box. We really appreciate those contributions. I know it's really makes it easier and more safe to be able to really think in your first language. So I do want to create that space if someone is willing to do so. I know we've got a lot of languages and smarts on this call. Our question here, as it relates to adaptive leadership, as we've been hearing on these previous calls, is really understanding that we've got some really great resources that have been developed and bolstered in our community, but for some reason, they're just not reaching a lot of these populations. And in order to really figure that out, we have to link arms and collaborate. I almost spoke to this on our last call around co-designing with the people that we want to serve. So my question is, I'd really love if one or two people would be able to chime in and talk about a decision that was made recently in your work or organization and how the community was involved in that process. That's an area that we'd love to see some more information on. I know that slide Peyton shared earlier, we saw a really great, I think it was about 59% of the folks on this call reported that community voice is being lifted up in their work. And some folks have said, you know, we're looking forward to doing that. So one, want to create space for someone to translate the effective question there. And then two, invite a couple people to share an example of how that's being done in their work.
Hi, this is Colleen Lang from United Way, King County. We have a couple of things going on. One is about how we're getting the rental assistance money out. So we have a site that's going live tomorrow for people, individuals to apply online for rental assistance. But our Racial Equity Coalition of grantees, that is a group that was developed for a specific program that serves youth, has been kind of serving as a consulting group for us in terms of pushing back on things that they think are not racially equitable. And one of them, and they're executive directors and staff of small community of color-based nonprofits. And they've been saying, you know, you need to, in addition, make grants to organizations that are based in communities of color where there's not going to be as much access to applying online, and that those folks will be underserved otherwise. So that was really great feedback. And they've been very vigorous in holding us accountable. And I think that's been super productive. And then this is not COVID related, but it's a advocacy related outreach that I'm trying to figure out how to develop. And I'm totally open to input if folks have ideas. I'm trying to figure out how to give stipends so that lobbyists of color and executive directors of community color-based nonprofits can participate in developing legislation that we're going to advocate for in the 2021 session. So just, you know, trying to figure out ways to level the playing field for participation. I'd love to hear people's thoughts about, you know, best practices.
Thank you, Colleen. So I'm hearing that you're consulting with the community to get information on best practices or next practices, also thinking about that equity piece, so compensating folks for the contributions they're making to this work. Inviting one more person to share an example of a decision that was recently made and how the community or end user recipient was involved in that decision making.
Hey, Kalika, it's Stephanie. I just want to just jump in here really quickly. I know it seems like a couple of folks are trying to add chat to everybody, and there may be some limitation for the folks that they can send chat to. They don't have an option for everybody. Vicki is working on it from behind the scenes. Zoom may have added some security issues that are causing some problems there. So if there are things that you think are really, really important to share, I invite you to share verbally. That's really great. Otherwise, include it in the chat privately to one of us and we'll get it included.
Thanks, Stephanie. Okay, one more person want to share a recent decision that was made.
Well, I'm just going to share a little bit. recent decision that we made in our program, Promotores program, is to have a weekly meetings with the team, with the promotores, and updated a little bit more about the services and the things that is being done for the community, and having an opportunity also to exchange some of their questions or their concerns with some of the providers. So we're gonna have on those meetings, I guess, from different organizations to do that, like I say, to do co-creation of ideas of how to moving forward in different services.
Thank you, Alma. Okay, well, thank you for taking that moment. Again, and we're going to continue to think about this through the rest of our time together today, focusing on what decisions they're making and how we can slow down and partner with our community to make those decisions, even at that consultant level. And then a little bit later in our call today, we will talk about some ways or areas that we can continue to deepen that partnership so that we're even collaborating or empowering our community to help us deliver these solutions.
Hey, Kalika.
Yeah.
Hey, Kalika, this is Sandy. And Liliana just messaged me from Padre saying she was willing to translate in Spanish. So do you want to just give her?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Liliana.
Liliana, do you want to unmute yourself and translate?
Hello. It's just needed to translate the adaptive leadership slide.
Sure. Thank you.
Ok. Sabemos que algunas personas experimentan las cosas de maneras diferentes, con un impacto diferente. Y necesitamos socios que puedan desarrollar soluciones con respuestas positivas a la comunidad, cuyo target sea la universalidad. What it means EQ.
Awesome.
Liliana, it's effective question is what EQ
Okay.
stands for.
Okay, pregunta efectiva. ¿Cuál es la decisión que se ha hecho recientemente y cómo fue la respuesta o el envolvimiento del usuario en ese proceso? That's the end.
Thank you. I love it. Thank you so much. Okay, just going to give a few more minutes just in case anybody else wants to jump in and share an example. If not, again, continue to pull this thread into our next section. So I'm going to move us on to our next slide. Business per usual, wanting to give us some time. I know HopeLink's recent work that's coming up here was mentioned at the top of this call. And I'm going to share some themes. As I mentioned before, as we're designing these meetings, we're really reflecting on the work that was happening in the previous call and designing each and every meeting in real time to meet you all where you're at in your work. To continue to drive this adaptive leadership work and community engagement, we really want, as we're thinking about these topics in large group today, is to think about how is this landing on the community? And in order for us to really know that, we have to be validating that with the community and engaging with them and having that dialogue. So I've seen a lot of that rich work happening over the series of these calls, hearing a lot of folks saying, okay, we've got this resource and we're ready to get it out the door, and then we're learning and continuously improving in real time. And we just really want to acknowledge all that rich work and real-time adaptations that are happening. So I'm going to move us to our next slide. And as folks are using this time to have a large group conversation, again, you can bring up other things that you've got going on, but just really wanting to lift up and pull those threads from our last meeting. Thinking particularly about youth voice, the team, when going over the data on these calls, has really noticed that that was something that was a gap. How is youth voice being incorporated? Some of us, that's more natural and organic as we work directly with youth, and other of us not so much. Thinking about advocacy work, whether that's related to policy making and policy change. We heard a lot of conversations around that as related to rent. Also thinking about advocacy work. We've got a lot of folks on this call today who work specifically with populations. I see Robert Broomfield is new on this call, as well as Liliana and Alma and I think Benjamin might be on this call as well, really focusing on particular groups in our community. That thread around parent stress, mental health in general, as well as physical health, and resources as it relates to food and funding. So I'm going to go ahead and put myself on mute. We've got till 10:55 here. So this time is yours to connect and lift up things that you want to share with the group.
Let's see. This is the first time I use, am I being listened to? Not sure. Yes.
Yes, thank you. We can hear you.
Okay, yes. My name is Jaime Mendez, and I am a news anchor for Univision Seattle, a Spanish newscast in Seattle, and I was invited by Liliana to join this meeting. I only have a few minutes, but I wanted just to share a little bit of what I'm doing and what I would love to learn more about this group. Through the news, we're the only local Spanish newscast, daily newscast. So, our job is huge in informing the public and obviously Spanish-speaking community here about just general help that is out there and what's going on. But also on a personal level, I am doing almost daily Facebook Live reports on what's going on. And I've been getting a lot of messages. I mean, literally hundreds of messages from people just begging for help, and mostly financial help or food. And so I am getting together with some business owners and just some people from the community who very generously have been organizing like their own sort of food banks and stores in an individual way. And so that's kind of the way, just like almost 1 by 1 or sometimes 10 by 10, just trying to do distribute food among the community. So it's a huge need. And I only have a few minutes, so I just wanted to put that out there. And if you have any ideas of how we can do a better job, please let us know. Also, being a newscast, and we've been here for 13 years, so pretty well known around here. We offer the resources of putting information in a mass way out there. For you, if you want to contact me, my email is Jaime, that's Jaime, at univisionseattle.com. Send me any ideas and information. Send me information about food banks, about resources for our community. We don't ask if people have documents or not, but obviously, we know that a lot of people in our community just do not qualify for a lot of the stimulus checks or unemployment, things like that. So they're literally without any income at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaime. I did, hopefully, please check the chat box and make sure that I put that in correctly. One thing I do want to offer, thank you for joining us. Thank you for the invitation for you to join us. You will get a recap email from this call, and we have a Google Doc where all of the amazing organizations and folks have this on these series of calls has dumped all the information on the resources that are in our community. So I will name that. That's one way to get all of the resources and richness that's on this call. So I do want to invite people to feel free to jump in and reply to Jaime, but I did want to name that we do have an online repository of the resources that exist within the organizations in this group. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
If I can go, I'm Samantha Pack, like I mentioned earlier. I'm with the Eastside Sound Publishing Reporter Papers, and I was invited by Stephanie to jump on this call. I'm, typically we report on what's happening here, but personally, I have a column for our paper. It's called Windows and Mirrors, that focuses on highlighting people in communities that typically don't receive as much coverage, which is why I did the piece that came out today on the racism against Asians and Asian Americans in the area. And I had emailed Eastside Pathways initially because I wanted to do a piece on just how the outbreak is affecting, communities of color and other marginalized communities like the LGBTQ, and basically the people that your organizations serve. And I was hoping to connect with some people with those different organizations to talk to, like how their communities are being affected and what is being done to help people and what kind of help people need. So if any of you are interested and would like to talk with me, I can leave my information, my email. Hopefully I can connect with you guys. My email is spak@soundpublishing.com, and I see that it's been added on the chat, to the chat on the side as well. So you can check there. But yeah, if anybody would like to talk to me about what you're doing to serve your respective communities and what type of help people are needing, and if I would love to be able to speak to like any of your clients, like any people that, who would be willing to speak. I know it can be a little, people can be hesitant to share their names and their situations, so I totally appreciate that. But if you know of anybody who would be willing to share what's been going on with them, I would greatly appreciate it. And thank you, and thank you for inviting me to join the call.
Thank you. I really appreciate, with a heavy heart, hearing the themes around just how things are landing on our communities, also hearing a lot of heat around particularly our communities of color. And as I mentioned before, seeing similar impacts that we saw before this, but it's just really compounded. And also those population numbers are growing as everybody is impacted economically during this time, and obviously some populations more than others. We've just got a few more minutes, so if there's anything else that really you want to lift up for a large group, Tammy, I see you.
Yeah.
I do want to make sure we've got other folks' voices. We've got 60 people on this call today. We do have more time, but we just have a few more minutes. So go ahead, Tammy.
Just look at the chat, because I think that the two things got pushed together in the chat, and I'd like to get those separated so that Samantha's information is different than mine. You see it?
Yep, thank you.
Yeah,
again, for folks, I do want to remind you that we have our Google Drive, which has our contact list, which is why we're having you put that in there. So that's always a great place to look offline for that information as well. Okay, you've got 3 more minutes. Any other large group conversation or updates folks want to share? Alma, I see you.
Yeah, I just want to talk a little bit how the talking to my team and I'm from NISO, yeah, and about some of the issues that the community been highlighting very much is about mental health support for the families with their with the kids at home. And we see a lot of increase on depression in the Latino community, how to help their kids when they're at home. And there is a very great need of support for the parents of how to deal with these situations at home.
Thank you, Alma. Okay, one more person.
Hi, this is Lalita Uppala from India Association of Western Washington.
Lalita.
If I could just take a minute to talk. I know somebody just brought up mental health, and I just wanted to highlight the issue of immigrant refugee communities who really don't have anyone to lean back on and come from cultures where extended families really play a very strong role in situations like this as we are facing today. And so IWW on our front, from our youth and seniors and families, are organizing series of webinars with our South Asian therapists, but we're also reaching out to our small businesses, and we're already seeing workers getting laid off and furloughed. And I think that's where your Google Doc is going to be very helpful for us to reach out and see what are some support services we can connect for our communities. But coming back to mental health, really, it is very difficult for our communities to reach out for services that are provided. And so as much light as can be shed on the different services that are being provided on the East Side for families to reach out and seek support, particularly because children are home and parents really don't know when schools would start and don't know how fall is going to look like. There's a lot of concern about jobs. And so just highlighting all of that and saying that we are doing our work, but we do need our networks to reach out for support.
Thank you, Lolita. That makes a really great transition for me. I'm going to move us on to our next slide once Peyton's done capturing that. One big high five for Peyton. He's been working really quickly to capture your voices and mimic charting for us in this virtual space. So I really appreciate him doing that. He's amazingly talented at it, and I really appreciate it. I do want to lift up some of the themes and summaries that I'm hearing again in our call. I really appreciate, as Peyton shared in our data, it's really critical, and some of you also named, to really understand what are those groups so that we can really be focused and thoughtful about that designing. We are going to do a breakout session like usual this week. However, it will not be facilitated. We know that having such a small amount of time on these calls, it's challenging to get everybody's voices in. Also really want to give folks time to ingest what they've heard on this call, the data that they've seen on this call, and give you some time to do that work, as well as have some small group conversations so you can get that thought partnership that's so critical. We've gotten lots of positive feedback from all of you around, yes, I can, thank you, I can see the screen. Getting positive feedback on how great it is to be able to speak to someone who doesn't work in the same sector or the same organization, or potentially someone who has a different race or gender than you, to be able to get another perspective on how are you delivering those solutions and how might that look differently. So in the next 15 minutes, you'll be in a small group, probably 5 or less people. And the effective question, and if you have that pen and paper ready, please do write it down. The question we really want you to reflect on during this time is, again, what are those decisions that are being made? And how are youth and families being engaged in that decision-making process? At the bottom of the slide here, you'll see that there's our community engagement spectrum that we use. It's a measurement tool. On the left, you'll see at the top, it says technical solutions. When we're doing things that are known, they're effective, they're working, it's okay to consult and inform. We've talked a lot in these calls about how do we effectively communicate to our populations the resources that we have. So when Jaime was saying, I'm getting all these calls about folks who are needing food resources and funding resources, but they don't qualify, right, because of their immigration status or their nationality. Well, that's actually an adaptive solution. That's at the other end. If I'm just informing you that you had food resources available and you don't understand that I don't qualify for them, there needs to be some adaptation done. As Stephanie talked about this earlier on the call around, we are building gaps into our systems, and quite often it's unknowingly. So when we link arms with those folks, those kids, and the families, then we can really understand how our systems are being designed and how that's impacting our communities. So again, you've got 15 minutes in this breakout session, really reflecting on the work that you're doing, the decisions that are being made in your area, and thinking about, is it truly technical? Is it effective? Is it working? Is it serving all those gaps? And if so, how are you effectively informing or consulting the people that you're looking to design those solutions for? However, on the other end of the spectrum, if it's not landing, if it's not meeting all the populations you're intending it to, how are you collaborating or empowering those folks so that those solutions can be designed? So I'm going to give just a few moments if there's any clarifying questions before we move you into breakout. I see that Mylin has her hand up here. Someone flagged me, so feel free to jump in now. Or if you want to unmute yourself, if you have any clarifying questions about how this breakout session activity is going to work.
I have to go.
Okay.
Thanks again for inviting me to be on this call. And I had sent an email or sent a chat to Eastside Pathways. So it sounds like in addition to the recording and the docs from today, the Google Docs will also be sent out that sharing information.
Yep. Thank you, Samantha. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you again.
Okay.
Have a good day, everybody.
You as well. Thank you. So
Bye.
do you know that when we come back from this 15-minute breakout session that we're going to be capturing a poll we have seen on these calls, we know that we've extended the time to give more time to do this work, but we do see a decrease in folks who are able to stay on this long. If you can, we really do encourage you to stay through the next 15 minutes as well as complete the poll. That's where we're capturing all this data to give back to you all. So we're going to give you 15 minutes to do this work, to reflect on decisions that are being made in your communities, how the community is being involved in that. And then we come back, we're going to ask you on a scale of 1 to 5, right, from inform to empower, how those decisions are being made so we can capture that data and use that to inform our work moving forward. We really do need to understand the baseline in our community around how decisions are being made so that we can figure out how to show up differently and how to tweak the work that we're doing. So Vicky's going to magically move us into breakout sessions, and we will see you back in 15 minutes. One more. All right, looks like we've got almost everybody back. I will say that I missed having small group conversation with you all, but it was also great to sync with my team. I do want to name, we have a new participant, Jean from Lake Hills Elementary. She is helping run a food bank center for folks who are in need of those resources. So Jean's going to put her information in the chat box, and we'll be sure to include that on our Google Drive. I know there has been continued conversation around where do you access that list of resources as well as contact information. Peyton, our data officer, will be dropping that link in the chat box. It is there now. Thank you, Peyton. So if you don't already have that, it's in the chat box. It's also included in the recap email that you get after each of these meetings. So I want to encourage folks to continue to access those. As Stephanie said, the work really happens offline of these calls. This is really just a touch point to get thought partnership, as well as understand at a high level what's happening in our community. Before we move on, we're going to do a quick poll. Again, capturing, we want to hear back from you on a scale of 1 to 5. How are you involving youth and families? So there's going to be a poll that's popping up on your screen now. We do ask for everybody. I see that there's 38 of us on the call still to complete this poll, and we're going to use this data to inform our work moving forward. This data is critical for us to understand in our community what is the baseline as it relates to community engagement. And also that first question helps us understand as a team how this design is serving you so that we can continue to improve this virtual facilitation model or meeting.
Are you able to? I'm not.
Love seeing the data coming in. We're really excited to be able to continue to give this back. At the top of this meeting, we were able to give back your data from the last time where we saw that folks were saying we're seeing an increase in community voice being lifted up. We're seeing an increase in resources being distributed in our community. So it's really important to be able to capture that community level data to inform our work. Just a few more people, and then we will move on. Just as I'm doing a quick snapshot, we haven't completely finished the survey, but I'm able to see that majority of you are reporting that youth are informed in your work, about 38%. And then I'm seeing some spikes around families are being collaborated with, And then another portion of you are saying that they're either involved or informed in that decision-making process. So it's great to see that there's a wide variety on this call as it relates to how we're working together with communities and families. And we want to continue to better understand that as we continue to have these calls, get examples of different innovative and strategic ways people are using community voice. So I see there's just a few more people. Love to have you, if you haven't already, complete that, and then we can move on. So Joe, if you don't mind moving us to the next slide as we wait for just a few more people to complete the poll. I want to close our meeting. Really want to express my gratitude for all the work that's happening. As I've mentioned before, as a person of color in our community, I have 3 children in Lake Washington School District. I'm really thankful for all of you and the work that you're doing in our community to serve our families. My heart is moved by all the work that you're doing. My heart is also heavy thinking about the intersectionality of our people of color in this community, as well as other dimensions of diversity. I'm hearing a lot of themes around how solutions are being developed that are systemically not including people who are immigrants, undocumented, or DACA recipients. I'm hearing themes around how our Asian community members aren't feeling the same sense of community and safety, whether that be to great shifts in employment and financial or racially charged incidents. So just really thankful for everybody being courageous, being able to racialize these conversations, and taking the time off these calls to really think about the people who we are calling our community members and the people that we look to serve. I'm gonna invite just 1 or 2 people to share some of the reflections or action commitments that they made during that breakout session. Please use the chat box or unmute yourself. We want to hear from a couple people. What are you going to do differently moving forward so that the community is involved, engaged, they're included in your decision making moving forward?
Kalika,
yes.
Hi, it's Tammy. In our group, I'm committed to making a direct connection with Maylin Tai as far as the disconnect between the food security with the school lunches and what we're really seeing in the district. And I'm going to make a commitment there. And I also want to make a connection with Lalita, and I need her information to be put into the chat box so that I can make a connection with her and the community that she serves as well.
Thank you, Tammy. Appreciate that action commitment and commitment to collaborate. Okay, 2 more people.
This is Lynn Robinson. I would say that it's not enough to just get the information out there. I think that the city, as a resource for a lot of information, needs to assess how effective we are at getting the information out to everybody who needs it and make the changes. So I'm committed to having those conversations and getting the feedback and making sure that we make the adjustments needed.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'd also offer, when we're thinking about the spectrum from colorblind to culturally responsive to anti-racist, there's this idea of understanding that food, fashion, and fabric and language is one piece around being culturally responsive. And there's that whole nother level that's really understanding systems around racism and making sure we're designing and holding for both of those. So I really appreciate you naming. It's one thing to inform people, it's a whole nother thing to really be relational and engage with them so that you can be thoughtful about how you're designing those things, even beyond language, as well as the types of vehicles that you're using, whether they be a flyer, a postcard, or email, text, a lot of the great ideas we've heard on this call. I'm gonna invite 1 more person to share. One more person, something that came up for you in your breakout session around thinking about how do you work with youth or families to make decisions in your work?
Hey, Kalika, this is Sergeant Karp with Kirkland. One thing that kind of struck me when I was reflecting and answering the question is, like, number 1 was that you're informing. And I thought, there's actually a lot of ways that we can do a better job of just the informing aspect, right? Not like assuming that we already inform. Because one thing that I find out a lot of times is just how we could do a better job, just how either with whether it's misinformation or just the avenues that we try to inform people, how ineffective those can be sometimes.
Yeah, thank you for that. We've heard a lot of themes around that in this call. I loved seeing all of the collaboration and innovation that was happening on the last few calls where folks like Helena and Jim from the city of Kirkland both saying, hey, that's a great idea, let's try that. I also heard text messages and videos giving people a script. So I really appreciate you lifting up. While there are situations where informing and consulting is the right strategy or pathway, we also really have to be thoughtful about how we're doing that so that it's effective. Thank you all again for joining us. Thank you for allowing me to facilitate. I know that these meetings go quickly, but really do appreciate this time and the work that we're doing for our community. I'm going to pass it to Stephanie to close us out.
Thanks, Kalika. Sorry, I had a moment there. I couldn't unmute myself. So I wanted to just briefly say thank you to everybody for joining. As folks may know, we're doing these twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, 10 a.m. And they've expanded a little bit. We started out by doing it for 60 minutes. Now we're up to almost an hour and a half. So we really appreciate everybody's participation. I want to emphasize again, this is an opportunity for us to come together and figure out how we work together better to develop systems, so that systems being our policies, our practices, things that we have in place that will allow people, specifically those most in need, to get better access to supports and services that actually help them. Lynn, I think several people have pointed out on this call, it's one thing to start to make those connections. It's another thing to start to really ensure that what we're doing is impactful. We talked about this a bit on our last call, and I encourage everybody to take an action commitment. It doesn't have to be big. It can be a small thing, but when we are taking action, it becomes an accumulative change in our community that ultimately will create better systems for people who really need it. And so thinking back on our first Gracious Space question about how we are, what is it that works to engage community? I heard relationships, I heard curiosity, I heard transparency, I heard openness to every idea. So I encourage you to keep those in mind as you continue down the path to work, and measure what you're doing. Measure and try to understand the impact that you're having, so that as a community, we're understanding the full impact. We will see you next Tuesday, 10 a.m. Thank you for being here. Thank you for all that you're doing in the community, and be well.
Thank you.